For as long as humanity has existed, death has been a mystery, an unavoidable passage that fascinated and frightened every civilization. Across millennia, cultures around the world devised remarkable methods to preserve the bodies of their dead, to protect them from decay, and in doing so, to challenge the limits of mortality itself. This is the story of ancient embalming, a journey through sacred rituals, secret recipes, and extraordinary craftsmanship that kept the dead alive for eternity. 1. The origins of embalming. The art of embalming, or mummification, as it's often called, began not as science, but as faith. Ancient people believed that death was not the end. To live again in the afterlife, one's body had to remain intact. Long before written history, in the dry deserts of Egypt and South America, natural processes preserved the dead. Sand and salt drew out moisture from buried corpses, preventing decay. These naturally desiccated bodies inspired the earliest deliberate attempts at embalming. When we think of embalming, ancient Egypt immediately comes to mind. Egyptian embalmers elevated the preservation of the dead into a sacred art, a complex ritual that combined theology, chemistry, and craftsmanship. The belief system. Egyptians believed that each person consisted of several spiritual parts, the Ka, vital essence, the Ba, personality, and the Ak, immortal self. To reunite in the afterlife, these elements required a well-preserved physical vessel, the body. The embalming process. The most detailed account comes from Herodotus, the Greek historian who visited Egypt around 450 BCE. He described 3 main levels of mummification, based on wealth and status. Removal of internal organs. The first step was to eliminate the sources of decay. A specialist, called the slitter, made a small incision, usually on the left side of the abdomen. Through this, the embalmers removed the stomach, liver, lungs, and intestines. The heart, believed to be the seat of intelligence and emotion, was usually left inside, while the brain, paradoxically, was discarded. Using hooked instruments inserted through the nostrils, embalmers liquefied and extracted the brain. Drying the body. The empty body cavity was washed with palm wine and aromatic spices. Then came the key ingredient, natron, a naturally occurring salt mixture composed of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate. The entire body was covered and filled with natron for 40 days, absorbing all moisture. After dehydration, the skin appeared leathery and shriveled. Embalmers massaged the body with oils and resins to restore flexibility and pleasant fragrance. Then began the painstaking wrapping, hundreds of meters of linen strips soaked in gum and resin. Amulets were placed between layers to protect the deceased spiritually. The final layer was often painted with resin, creating a hard, glossy shell. The coffin and burial. The wrapped mummy was placed inside one or more coffins, often elaborately painted with spells from the Book of the Dead. The coffins were nested within a sarcophagus, surrounded by food, jewelry, and sacred texts to guide the soul through the underworld. The tools and materials. Ancient Egyptian embalmers used natron salt for desiccation, cedar oil and myrrh as disinfectants, beeswax for sealing, resins and gums for preservation, linen cloth for wrapping. Their workshops were both laboratories and temples, where every motion had ritual meaning. Even the smallest action, the cutting of flesh, the pouring of oil, was accompanied by prayers to Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming. Long before Egyptian embalmers perfected their craft, another culture on the Pacific coast of South America had already begun preserving their dead, the Chinchorro people of modern-day Chile and Peru, as early as 5000 BCE. Unlike the Egyptians, the Chinchorro mummified everyone, not just royalty or elites. Their process was astonishingly advanced for its time. The method. The Chinchorro removed the skin and flesh, dried the bones, and then reassembled the body with reeds, clay, and plant fibers. They covered the frame with a layer of paste made from ash and manganese, then reshaped the face and features using clay. Finally, they repainted the body, often in black or red pigment. These mummies were not hidden away but displayed during rituals, perhaps to maintain a visible connection between the living and their ancestors. In ancient China, death was viewed as a transition rather than an end. The body was a sacred vessel, and preserving it honored both the deceased and their descendants. One of the most extraordinary finds in Chinese archaeology is that of Lady Dai, Xianzhui, the wife of a Han Dynasty nobleman who died around 168 BCE. When her tomb was opened in the 1970s, her body was astonishingly well preserved, her skin soft, her limbs flexible, her internal organs intact. Secrets of the preservation. Scientists discovered that Lady Dai's body was encased in multiple nested coffins, sealed with layers of charcoal and clay to prevent air and bacteria from entering. She was immersed in an unknown liquid solution, possibly herbal or mercury-based, that inhibited decay. Chinese texts also refer to the use of jade suits for royal burials. Made of thousands of small jade plates sewn together with gold or silver wire, these suits symbolized purity and were believed to prevent decomposition and grant immortality. In the high Andes, Incan embalmers practiced both natural and artificial mummification. The extreme cold and dry conditions of the mountains often preserved bodies naturally, but priests and specialists enhanced the process with ritual care. The children of Yuyayaca, discovered in Argentina, are among the best preserved mummies in the world. These children were sacrificed to the gods over 500 years ago, their bodies frozen on mountaintops. For the Incas, mummified ancestors were not mere relics, they were active members of society. Royal mummies were brought out for ceremonies, dressed, and even consulted for political decisions. Beyond Egypt, other ancient Near Eastern cultures practiced forms of body preservation. The Babylonians and Assyrians occasionally embalmed their kings with aromatic oils and resins. In Persia, Zoroastrians avoided burying bodies, believing that corpses polluted the earth. Instead, they placed them in towers of silence, where exposure to the sun and birds of prey would purify the remains. Although not true embalming, this method reflected the same deep concern with the soul's journey and the purity of the elements. While the Greeks and Romans preferred cremation, certain classes adopted embalming, especially soldiers and nobles whose bodies had to be transported long distances. The Greeks used honey and wax as preservatives. In Homer's Iliad, the hero Achilles anoints the body of Patroclus with fragrant oils to delay decay. The Romans, influenced by Egyptian customs after conquering Egypt, experimented with spices, myrrh, and aloe. Wealthy families sometimes commissioned partial embalming to display bodies during extended funerals. In parts of sub-Saharan Africa, several cultures practiced unique preservation rites. The Bantu and Baganda peoples of Central Africa used herbs and smoke drying, while in ancient Libya, bodies were coated in resin and wrapped in skins. In some tribes, the body of a respected leader was seated upright, smoked over fire, and kept as a symbol of protection, a living ancestor watching over his descendants. In regions such as Papua New Guinea and Indonesia, mummification was part of ancestral veneration. The Anga people of Papua New Guinea smoked their dead over slow-burning fires in specially built huts. The bodies were then displayed on cliffs, seated and decorated, watching over their villages. In Sulawesi, Indonesia, the Toraja people still practice elaborate funerary customs. Bodies may be kept at home for months or even years, treated with herbal preservatives and formalin, and later buried in cliffside tombs with great ceremony. As Christianity spread through Europe, embalming took on a new purpose. The Church valued relics, the preserved bodies or body parts of saints. To keep these relics from decay, monks developed rudimentary embalming techniques involving alcohol, spices, and wax. During the Renaissance, anatomy and science revived interest in preservation. Embalmers such as Leonardo da Vinci experimented with chemical injections to study the human form, laying the groundwork for modern embalming. By the 17th and 18th centuries, embalming shifted from spiritual ritual to scientific procedure. Advances in anatomy, medicine, and chemistry introduced new preservatives like arsenic, mercury, and eventually formaldehyde. Yet, the spirit of ancient embalmers lived on, the same desire to defy decay, to preserve memory, and to hold death at bay through human ingenuity. What do these ancient practices tell us about humanity? At their core, embalming rituals were never just about the body. They were about continuity, the connection between the living and the dead, the physical and the spiritual. To embalm was to express faith that life transcends flesh. It was a way of saying, you are gone, but you remain with us, preserved in form, in memory, in eternity. From the burning sands of Egypt to the icy peaks of the Andes, from the jade tombs of China to the smoky cliffs of Papua, humankind's attempts to preserve the dead reveal a universal truth: that we have always struggled against impermanence. That we have always longed to make the transient eternal. The ancient embalmers may not have conquered death, but in their art, they achieved something timeless, the victory of remembrance over oblivion.